Let's talk about how to find strong secondary sources for your academic essay. First, what is a good secondary source? Most importantly, you should be able to identify the author, and that author should have credentials that demonstrate his or her expertise on the topic. If you can't figure out easily who the author is, then your source is not credible. Secondly, your source should have been peer-reviewed, which means that other experts in the field should have read and reviewed it and approved it. Some examples of bad secondary sources include websites like Wikipedia, or study guides like SparkNotes or Shmoop. In these cases, you don't know who the author is, much less whether that author is an expert in the field. In popular newspaper and magazine articles, you may know the author, but chances are that author is not an expert in the field, and the article has not been peer-reviewed. The same kind of issues arise with blog posts and general web pages. Even if you can identify the author, these are not peer-reviewed sources, and they are not acceptable for an academic essay. So where can you find good secondary sources? Use books and essay anthologies from reputable publishers. You can find these using catalogs like IUCAT. We'll talk about this a little later. You can also use articles from peer-reviewed journals. You can find these in online databases, and we'll talk about a bunch of these later also. Finally, you can get some great ideas for books and articles by looking at lists and bibliographies. If you're writing about a novel, for example, look at the very beginning or end of that book. Chances are good you'll find a list of recommended texts for further reading. Believe it or not, you can also actually use Wikipedia as a starting point. Even though the Wikipedia site itself is not a good reputable secondary source, it will often have a list of sources that are reputable secondary sources. For example, take a look at the Wikipedia page for Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. Nothing on this page, for the most part, could be used for an academic essay. We have no idea who wrote it, and it has not been peer-reviewed at all. However, if I scroll to the very bottom of the page, I will find a section called References. The References section has a list of books and articles, many of which have been peer-reviewed. You can look at these titles, decide if any of them sound like they would be useful for you, and then go track them down using the database or library catalogs that I'll show you a little bit later. So now that we understand what constitutes a good secondary source, let's talk about valuable search techniques that you can use to get the best possible search results back while you're looking for those secondary sources. First, do multiple searches using synonyms and alternate forms of your search term. For example, if you're writing an essay on the theme of illusion, try the alternate word form illusory, or use synonyms for illusion like mask or mirage, or anything else you can think of. Don't just search for the book title either. Try just searching for the author's name, for example. If you're writing about Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and you type just Joseph Conrad into the search field, you may actually find an article written about something else that Joseph Conrad wrote, but that would still apply to your discussion of Heart of Darkness. Don't just look at the first page of results either. Go a few pages back. Sometimes there's a real gem of a result hiding a few pages in that you'll be very sorry you missed. Finally, use Boolean operators to widen or restrict your search as needed. Boolean operators are special words that you put between your search terms, and they affect what gets included or excluded from your search. In this video, we're going to focus on 4 Boolean operators in particular: or, and, not, and the use of quotation marks. So suppose we're searching with the terms cat and dog. If we use the Boolean operator or and type cat or dog in the search field, we're going to get everything back. We're going to get articles that talk about cats, articles that talk about dogs, and articles that talk about both cats and dogs. This is pretty much the same as if you had just typed cat-dog in the search field. The or is typically understood in your average search. On the other hand, if you type the word and, cat and dog, in the search field, you're going to get results back that are very limited. If an article has been written about cats, but it doesn't mention dogs at all, you're not going to get that back. you're only going to get articles that talk about both cats and dogs. If you type cat, not dog, you're going to get restricted results. You'll get articles that are written about cats, but only the ones that don't mention dogs at all. The final Boolean operator that's great to use is the quotation mark. Quotation marks will ensure that you get results that have the exact combination of words and punctuation that you want. For example, if you're looking for things written about the author Joseph Conrad and type his name without quotation marks, yes, you're going to get results about Joseph Conrad, but you're also going to get results about anyone named Joseph and anyone named Conrad. That can get a little overwhelming because it gives you a lot of garbage results to sift through. So type it with quotation marks, and that way you're only going to get results back about the specific name Joseph Conrad. Now, once you get your list of search results back, how do you decide which of those results are worth looking at in more detail? First, and most obviously, look at the title of your article or book. Sometimes that alone will be enough to figure out if you want to read it or not. In a lot of cases, though, you're not really sure when you look at the title if it's worth your time or not. In that case, if you're reading an article, check if it has an abstract. An abstract is a one-paragraph summary of the article. It includes the article's thesis statement, and sometimes also has an overview of the main arguments and subject matter that the article covers. If the article doesn't have an abstract, then read the first page or two. Usually by then you'll know whether it's worth it to keep reading or not. In the case of a book, read or at least skim the introduction chapter. Introductions will often have a chapter-by-chapter summary, and that way, by looking through the introduction, not only can you get some main ideas that might be useful in and of themselves as secondary source, but you may also be able to figure out if there's a specific chapter out of that book that you want to read by itself. Once you've decided if a book or an article is worth your time, then do more than just read the first couple pages. Read the entire article. Read the entire book chapter. Let them give you the most benefit possible for your essay. And of course, underline your quotes as you read. Or in the case of library books, you can bookmark key passages by putting a sticky post-it note in the margin. So now let's briefly look at the actual websites, catalogs, and databases that you will use to do these searches for secondary sources. Begin by going to the Indiana University Library homepage at libraries.indiana.edu. All the database and catalog links can be found by starting at this site. Now, I will admit, Indiana Library likes to change its webpage fairly frequently, so this might not look exactly like the website does today. Nevertheless, you can still more or less figure out what you need. The IUCAT button, which is the button that gives you the catalog for the library's physical books, is up here at the top of the page. If you scroll to the footer of the website, you can also find some links to certain article databases. There's Academic Search EBSCO, and there's JSTOR, which is my personal favorite. If you want to get to a different database, for example Project Muse, you can simply type the name into the search bar and hit enter. And there you'll see the link to Project Muse is the first one returned. A few bits of advice when looking at the journal databases. So the three major ones that I generally recommend are JSTOR, Project Muse, and Academic Search, also called EBSCO. These house collections of articles from a wide variety of published journals, but you do want to be a little bit careful. While most of the articles that you'll get back in these databases are peer-reviewed, sometimes there are articles that haven't been peer-reviewed there. Make sure that you're using an actual academic article. Do not use a book review, for example, or a popular magazine article. If you come across an author interview, however, that is okay to use as a credible secondary source. In the case of IUCAT, the catalog of books on the campus library, you'll find lists of books at multiple campuses and libraries throughout the Indiana University system. For our class's purposes, you'll want to restrict your search to books specifically at the Herman B. Wells Library on the Bloomington campus. Generally speaking, with IUCAT, unlike with the databases, any results you get back are safe to use and are credible secondary sources. If they're in our library, they are peer-reviewed and they are okay. One other neat thing to keep in mind when you're searching through IUCAT for sources is that books in the library are grouped on the shelves by subject matter. This means that, for example, to use our good old friend Joseph Conrad again, if you're looking for books about Heart of Darkness and you find one book in the library that you want to go check out, walk to the library, find that book on the shelf, and then look at all the books next to it in that area on the shelf, and you'll suddenly find tons and tons of books all about Heart of Darkness all right next to each other. Sometimes then, even if a book you want has been checked out, it's still worth going and looking at the shelf where the book would have been, because there might be other books in that area that will end up being good and useful for you. So let's do a quick review of the major takeaway points from this video. First, use a peer-reviewed source with a reputable author. Use IUCAT or JSTOR, Project Muse, or Academic Search for your searches. Do multiple searches with a variety of search terms and use Boolean operators. In databases, only look at journal articles. Don't use book reviews and don't use popular articles. Sometimes databases may have a peer review box that you can even check, and that way you can be sure that you can trust the articles coming back. And finally, at the library, look at the books surrounding your book on the shelf, because books are grouped by subject matter. That concludes our video. Happy hunting for your secondary sources.